Hello everybody, welcome back to the devlog. I've added plenty of new stuff, new HUD, new enemies, all sorts of things. It's going to be great. Let's get into it. Alright, so today I fixed up a bunch of the sounds. I made the explosion not last for quite as long because what happened before was that sometimes it would blow up and it would disappear and then you'd touch it and it would still hurt you, which was pretty silly. I also made enemies get deleted when they're far away so that new ones can spawn in to replace them so that the combat is more near you and you don't lose enemies. I also made it so in complementing that system, the enemies will spawn in the direction you are moving, which makes running off still fun. I also made the dash cooldown longer and normalized the dash vector because I realized it actually was faster if you went diagonally, which is a coding mistake on my part, and yes, that's nice now and it's not too overpowered like it used to be. I also made it so that the shooters can only shoot 4 at a time. If only 6 enemies are on the screen, 4 of them will shoot. And that just means it's not like a bullet hell crazy thing. I also made it so that some enemies, they have like a priority thing, so some enemies will shoot no matter how many other enemies there are. So that could be reserved for like bosses and mini bosses and stuff. But the grunt enemies only can shoot 4 at a time and take turns shooting so that there's no crazy undodgeable bullet swarms like in some games. I also made the objectives spawn a lot further away because, as I'm sure you saw in the last devlog, they all spawned within walking distance of each other, very close. Like you could see them on the same screen, and yeah, it just kind of ruined the feeling of like exploring this big level when they're literally right next to each other. And it kind of messed with the dialogue as well, because he's acting like they're all really far away from each other and that you need to find them, but if they're right next to each other that doesn't apply, so it just felt weird. I also made enemies spawn closer to the camera, again to focus the enemies in and mean you can't just outrun them all the time, because that really wasn't fun, because before you could just kind of dash away and you'd leave all the enemies behind and it really sucked, because it was really fun when you stood more still, but once I added objectives it kind of became like they would just get lost as you ran off. But now they kind of follow you a bit more by spawning in the direction you move and by spawning closer to you and getting deleted when they're too far away to make way for the new ones. I also made the orange ground texture follow the player instead of being level size, so it's actually a fairly small orange square which just is parented to the player and moves with them, which is probably slightly more efficient than it was before. That way it's not rendering this enormous slaw polygon. Alright, so today I made the enemies spawn more spread out, because before if you were moving in one direction they would all spawn in the exact same spot in the direction you were moving. I also made the signal emitter objectives drop loop now. It's probably too much. I also shortened the rocket detection range so that you can't like cross map something with them. I also made it so that when they change target, they will have a lower tracking intensity, because before, as soon as the target died before the rocket hit it, the rocket would suddenly snap to the next one instantly and do like a right angle turn, and it just looked really silly. So that's fixed now. I also made the grunts slightly slower, because with the dash better balanced, they were a bit too fast. It was really hard to get away from them consistently. Just for a basic enemy, I thought they were too tricky. I also made the collectibles go up in the Z order when you pick them up, so that they don't go under the ones that are still. I also fixed the signal emitters Z order, which was not right before. I also made it so that the important dialogue actually overrides the other dialogue, because I thought it did, but it turns out it didn't. But now it works. And I also added this little landing zone over here, which is meant to be like when you finish all the objectives this will appear, and it's got like a little shader I made, and when you do it, it says clear the area first so I can land this damn thing. Then you have to kill everything, and when you get on it, welcome aboard Patriot, and it shows you your money and stuff. But it's very early days yet. Alright, so I've had a bit of a hiatus and have decided that I actually think the game was more fun before I added objectives, so I might go to some kind of infinite horde style of game. So I removed the objectives, I also removed the landing zone thing, and I've added a wave system and enemies. I also made it so the counter for the money rolls more quickly. because it was a bit slow before. It was kind of tedious to look at. Anyways, I've made it so that at the end of each wave, you get an upgrade. So now I get given an upgrade, and there's only 3 or 4 different ones I've made so far. And it can give you repeat ones, as you can see here, and I'll fix that soon. So you can increase your fire rate, or you can decrease the reload time, and there's health ones and dash speed ones and stuff like that. And you can see it's, for example, speed loader 1. There's a certain amount, and I can specify how many versions there are of each upgrade. You can see the reload time's a bit shorter. I will add some upgrades which aren't just stat upgrades, but at the moment that's just what was easiest to implement, and I'll add other ones later. So maybe I'll add one which means, I don't know, your bullets explode or something like that, just as an example. I also made it so that the enemies spawn closer to you and get deleted at a less far distance. That way they're constantly around you and you never leave any behind. That way it feels like you're constantly in the action. Alright, here's another one. Increase maximum hull integrity from 100% to 105%. That can go up as well. So now I have more health. Alright, so today I, as you can see, improved the font for the HUD. I also added 2 new enemies. These things, which explode. I also added this enemy here, which is like a shotgun enemy. I also made it so that upgrades can only appear once. You won't see the same one twice in the one screen. I also made it so that gibs change speed depending on how big they are, so that these big fat gibs on this enemy move slower when it dies, so it looks a bit more weighty and realistic. I also made it so that some of the enemies, so at the moment it's only the 2 new ones, have a spawn limit, so there can only be, for example, 3 spawned at one time. That way you don't get 10 mini bosses at once or something like that. Alright, so today I added a pause menu and added like a button theme with sounds. A temporary sort of settings menu, which is very, very early stages. I can't really figure out what I want with that. And you've got like a quit menu, and it has an "Are you sure?" prompt. I also improved the overall UI and just made everything look better. I also improved the fire rate upgrade so that you start with a lower fire rate and you have to upgrade it to get to the initial super OP fire rate. So yeah, here we go. Increase fire rate from 100% to 115%. And that's a little bit faster, and eventually you get back to the default fire rate. I would have made it so that that was the base and then you upgrade from there, but it was just so fast that it felt ridiculous if it went any higher than the default, so I've lowered it to start with so that you can upgrade it. Alright, so today I added a new type of upgrade, which I've called Boolean upgrades, because they act as booleans. I've just got some money here so I can actually afford this upgrade. So the first instance of this upgrade I have is called Smoking Surprise, and it's a boolean upgrade I've called it because it can be true or false, and there's no tiers to it, and it's not a stat upgrade like these ones. It's just a special ability upgrade which has its own code for it, and isn't just automatic like the others. So this Smoking Surprise means that the Gatling gun will shoot an explosive round for every 10th shot, and I've set it up so you can set specific prices for upgrades, and I should have an explosion every 10th shot. I might need to nerf it or buff it, we'll see. It's probably not balanced yet, but it's pretty cool. Alright, so today I added these little path areas, or like dirt, whatever they are, because I think it adds a little bit of extra variety. I also added this enemy called the Arc Knight, which shoots these arcing projectiles, which kind of go in a curve shape, and they're pretty cool. They're pretty hard to dodge when there's lots of enemies nearby, although on their own they're not that tough. I also added a wall to the edge of the map, which means you can't just run off forever and break the game. I also made the harder enemies only spawn in the later waves, which is why I've gone to wave 10, because that's when all the hardest enemies so far start spawning. I also added this new enemy here called the Paladin, which looks a little goofy, so I might change it, but it's like a high damage sort of enemy. It's kind of like a bigger version of the normal melee enemy. I also made the shadows last for longer before they disappear, because before, if you walk too far away, they would vanish. I also made it so that the explosion flash doesn't trigger if it's low in amount, because it was kind of distracting that there'd be like a split-second flash. Anyway, that's all for today. Enjoy.